All right, guys, so notes 2.5, segments, midpoints, and bisectors. Very similar to notes 2.4. We're just going to throw that bisector word in there. But to start off, let's practice what we did the other day. The first thing is the definition of a midpoint. We talked about that in the other notes. Midpoint is a point on a segment that is equidistant from both endpoints. Obviously, I can't write a D. Endpoints, there we go. Which basically means it's a point that's in the middle of the line. So we're going to start off with a few examples of what we did the other day. We're going to use that midpoint formula, which remember the midpoint is essentially an average. So here it says find the coordinate of the midpoint of RS. It looks like I have R here at -2, and I've got S here at 9. So I'm going to throw it into my equation. I'm going to take that M, the midpoint, somewhere in the middle there, is -2 plus 9. But remember, we need to divide it by 2 and find the average, which is actually 7/2, which is a legitimate answer, but 3.5 is just as good. So I'm just going to mark it there. And to me, I mean, marking it's not imperative, but it might help you see if you made a mistake. So I'm going to say that the midpoint is at 3.5. Now, taking it up just a little bit, we have B is the midpoint of AC. Now, it didn't really give us a picture here, so I'm going to kind of draw it out. Here's A. Here's C, my wonderful picture, and I know it tells me that B is the midpoint. It says that from A to B it's Z plus 2, and then it tells me that from B to C it's 2Z minus 6. And I want to go ahead and point something out here. I'm sure I've done it in the actual lectures, but if I look at the picture, AB does not appear to be the same length as B to C, which is the definition of a midpoint. However, once I say it is, it is. If I tell you that this line right here is parallel to this line right here, they obviously are going to intersect, right? But if I tell you that, then that's actually the case. Anyway, we'll talk about that more as we go on. Well, since that's the midpoint, that means that this segment and this segment must be equal. So let's set those expressions equal. Z plus 2 equals 2Z minus 6. Now we can solve this pretty easily. I'm going to subtract Z from this side, but at the same time I'm going to add 6 to both sides. If you're not comfortable with that, feel free to split it up, but I think we're all right. The Z's cancel. I'm left with 8 on the left. 2Z minus Z leaves me Z, and the 6's cancel, so I get that Z is equal to 8, and that is what it asked us to find. Now amping it up just a little bit more, find the coordinates of the midpoint of EF, where E is the point -2,4, F is the point 3,1. So let's remember, I'm going to go ahead and label X1, Y1, X2, Y2. And guys, it's not important. I mean, you don't have to do that, but it will help. So this one's the averages again, so be careful. I'm going to say the X coordinate of the midpoint would be my X's, -2 plus 3 divided by 2. That's 1 divided by 2, which is perfectly legitimate answer. We could also call it 0.5. So there's part of our midpoint. I'm going to come over here and write my point M, 0.5. And then we'll do the Y midpoint as well. Looks like 4 plus 1 over 2, which is 5 over 2, which can be said as 2.5. So again, if you like the fractions, I'm fine with that because fractions are exact. But since they're pretty easy decimals, I'm using those today. All right, guys, let's go to the next page and look at the next graph. It says here that M is the midpoint of AB. Now this one, it's very important to draw a picture because it's changing it up. I know that right here, M, that's the midpoint of AB. So I'm going to go ahead and mark it. That means these two are congruent, right? M is the midpoint of AB. If A is the 0.35, so this is actually on a grid, and M is -2, 1, they want us to find the coordinates of B. So it's kind of backwards of what we did last time. Instead of finding the midpoint, they gave it to us for finding an endpoint. But we can work this just the same. So I'm going to say that this is my X1, Y1, and this is my XM, YM. And I'm going to work the problem. So remember, it's XM equals, so my XM is -2, and that equals my X1 plus my X2. Well, X1's 3, and I don't know what the other X is, but I know I have to divide that by 2. Now I'm going to go ahead and set up the other one as well. So this is for my X's, okay? The other one's for my Y's. I start with my YM. It equals the Y I know, which is 5, plus the Y I don't know, over 2. And now we just have to solve these problems, which isn't very bad. Let's get rid of the fractions. I multiply both sides by the denominator, so those cancel. -4 equals 3 plus X. I subtract 3 from both sides, and I get my x value to be -7. Oops, all right. Now I move over here, and I basically have the same exact process. Multiply both sides by 2. I'm going to come over here. That's 2 equals 5 plus y. So I subtract 5 from both sides, and I get my y is -3. So I have a midpoint, or I'm sorry, my endpoint as 7, -3. So be careful, because it might ask 5 questions in a row, or it asks for the midpoint. And then bam, number 6 is going to be, here's the midpoint, find an endpoint. Don't do it backwards, because I can guarantee you some of you are like, oh, 3 plus -2 is 1, so that one's 1/2. Well, that's the midpoint. Be careful. Now let's talk about something a little bit new today, not any more difficult. A segment bisector is a point, a line, or a plane. So it can be any of those things that intersects a segment at its midpoint. So it's sort of like something cutting into or being placed in the center of a line. It could be something like 2 lines cutting each other in half, and that's the midpoint right there. It could be 2 pieces of paper cutting each other in half. Let's look at this problem real quick. Example 5. B is between A and C. It did not say that B is a midpoint. It did not say that it was a bisector. All it said is that B is somewhere in between A and C. It says from A to B, it's 2y plus 6. It says from B to C, it's y plus 8. And then it tells us that AC, the whole thing, is 20. And it wants us to find the value of y and determine if B is a bisector. Okay, so it's asking 2 questions. Well, if I drive from Stephenville to Dublin, and then from Dublin to Comanche, I add up the total amount, and that gives me, right? So if Dublin's 10 miles, and then it's another 20 miles to Comanche, I drove 30 miles. So you add up the pieces and set them equal to the whole. So 2y plus 6 plus y plus 8 equals 20. I can combine my like terms here. Let's see, that's 3y plus 14 equals 20. I can subtract 14 from both sides, and I get 3y equals 6. And I can divide both sides by 3, and I get that y equals 2. Now that's the first part of the question. But how to determine if it's a bisector or not is you plug in that y and you see if those 2 segments are equal. Because if AB equals BC, we have a bisector. So let's check, okay? So I'm going to have 2 times 2 plus 6 equals 2 plus 8. If they're equal, then we're good. That's 4 plus 6, which is 10. 2 plus 8 is 10. It is a bisector. You may not have to show that much work, but there you go. All right, let's go on to the next page. So this last one is going to be all off this picture, 6, 7, 8, and 9. It says use the figure below, for example, 6 through 9. Now it tells us some stuff about this picture that is important. We need to mark. WY bisects UV at Y. That means U to Y and Y to V are congruent. So I'm going to write that out just in case. UY equals YV. It says if UY is 5, then what's YV and UV? Now, you may not need a picture here. I understand that completely. However, when it gets more difficult, you might. So I'm just going to kind of sketch that picture again like this. I know we have U, Y, and V. I'm going to say UI is 5. So that must make YV 5 as well, because they're congruent. And then it asks for what, UV? Well, that's the whole thing. 5 plus 5 gives me the whole length to be 10. So just be careful. I know that drawing pictures on these is not necessary, but I promise you, when it gets more complicated problems, you might want to have practice drawing the pictures. Let's look at the next one. I'm going to go ahead and re-sketch this again. U, Y, V. And the other good thing about writing or drawing pictures is if you mess up and you have a picture, I generally get points for those. Anyway, it tells me that from U to Y is 4x minus 3. Then it tells me that Y to V is x. It says find the other 2 pieces. Well, these are, I mean, it's another setup just like we saw earlier. I know that these are congruent, so I set each of them equal to each other. I set them equal to each other. So 4x minus 3, had a little hiccup there, equals x. This is a 2-move thing, and a lot of people, when they see an x equals something like that on the other side with an x, they'll just stop and get confused. But just remember, move stuff around. I can subtract that x from the other side. It's just that it leaves me 0, not nothing, 0. Then I can add 3 to both sides, and I get 3x equals 3. And then, of course, I get that x equals 1, so step 1's good. It wants us to find uy. Well, that's 4 times 1 minus 3, which equals 1. And since x is 1 also, we have both our answers. So uy is 1, and it looks like uv is 1. All right, let's look at the next one. Almost finished. It says if u to v equals 18. So I better draw this one too. So there's u, y, and v. And this time they're telling me that the whole thing is 18 units long. And they tell me that from u to y is 9. It wants me to find y. Oh, let me put that right here. How about u to y is 9? This one's really not any work at all. You should know that those are equal. 9 plus what equals 18? I'm going to go ahead and tell you that yv is equal to 9 if you hadn't guessed it. Now, you can set that up a different way. You could say that you know that 9 plus yv equals 18, but I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. Last one. Let's see. U, y, v. It says from u to v, it is x plus 6. That is the whole thing. Make sure and label it correctly. It says from u to y, it's x minus 1, and it's basically wanting us to find this other piece over here. This one can be a little tricky if you don't think about it right. I know that this and this are the same, right? And I know that if I added those together, it should equal that. So let's add them together. That's an x minus 1 plus another x minus 1, and that equals x plus 6. Now I can combine like terms and figure everything else out. Let's see, 2x minus 2 equals x plus 6. Let's see, I can add 2 to both sides. Whoops, I don't know why I wrote that. But I can also subtract x from both sides. So that's what I'm going to do, and I get x equals 8. If x equals 8, which didn't ask us for x, it wants yv, I know that I just need to plug it in here and I can get it. So yv is equal to 8 minus 1, which is equal to 7. So guys, really a lot of these are overly complicated. They're a lot easier than you think, but you've seen pretty much every way to do it. So if you have trouble on the homework, just look back at the notes, the specific example, or let me know. Good luck, guys.